Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're taking something literally every financial practitioner wrestles with, and that is uncertainty. We're going to transform the rules of IAS 37 into a really concrete, actionable guide. Think of this as the funnel of certainty. We're basically taking all those vague future risks and filtering them right down into exact numbers on your balance sheet. It's going to be great. Okay, let's just dive right into our 6-part checklist to demystify the gray areas of accounting for uncertainty. First, objective and scope. Then, defining the uncertainties, followed by the recognition criteria. Fourth, measuring the best estimate. Fifth, onerous contracts and restructuring. And finally, exceptions and disclosures. Section 1. Objective and scope. So we're starting our funnel broad. The core objective of this standard is actually pretty simple, but it is absolutely crucial. We need to ensure appropriate recognition criteria and measurement bases for provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. Basically, if there's a financial cloud hanging over your entity, the users of your financial statements have a fundamental right to know exactly how big that cloud is and, well, when it might rain.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining the uncertainties.
To get the accounting right, we have to know exactly what bucket our uncertainty falls into. There's a hard line between day-to-day liabilities and provisions. With trade payables or standard accruals, you know who you owe, you know exactly how much, and you know when it's due. But provisions, they're kind of different. If there is uncertainty about the timing or the amount of future expenditure, then it is a provision. That uncertainty is the defining characteristic here.
But, what happens when that uncertainty is just way too high? If a potential liability fails the certainty tests, it drops out of the provision bucket and into this category, a contingent liability. This is a possible obligation from past events, or maybe a present obligation that is either not probable or just cannot be reliably measured. When it hits this stage, it merely gets disclosed in the notes. It stays totally off the balance sheet.
All right, Section 3, the recognition criteria.
Now for the really crucial part. The strict logical gates an item has to pass to actually land on the balance sheet. Recognize a provision when, and only when, all the following criteria are met. 1. A present obligation, whether legal or constructive, from a past event. 2. A probable outflow of resources. And 3. A reliable estimate can be made. So if all 3 of these conditions are met, then you must recognize a provision. Miss even one? Yeah, no provision.
So let's talk about the threshold for a present obligation being probable. In the world of IAS 37, probable simply means more likely than not. To put that into perspective, that translates to a greater than 50% chance that the obligation exists at the end of the reporting period. Meaning, if you're sitting at a 51% chance of losing a lawsuit and having to pay out, well, you pass this gate.
Section 4, measuring the best estimate.
Once we know we absolutely must recognize a provision, we have to measure it accurately based on the rules. The standard explicitly states you must record the best estimate. This is the amount an entity would rationally pay to settle the obligation at the end of the reporting period. And I need to raise a flag here. Warning: estimation uncertainty. This inherently requires heavy professional management judgment, looking at past experience, and sometimes even bringing in independent experts to figure out what that rational settlement amount actually is.
Now, what's really fascinating is how the standard explicitly demonstrates handling that uncertainty using statistical expected value. Think about it. If you have a large population of items, say thousands of goods sold with a 6-month warranty, you don't just guess, you weight the possible outcomes by their probability. A 75% chance of no defects, 20% minor, 5% major, you multiply those out and sum them up. It totally takes the guesswork out of large-scale provisions.
The standard gives us clear rules for measurement models, turning abstract theory into concrete math. Here is how it breaks down. If you have a large population of items, then use expected value weighted by probability. The impact? A provision measured before tax. If it's a single obligation, then use the individual most likely outcome, adjusted for higher or lower alternative possibilities. And crucially, if the time value of money is material, then you must discount it to present value. Where does that go? It actually increases the provision via unwinding the discount over time.
Okay, Section 5, onerous contracts and restructuring.
Next up, we're tackling 2 highly scrutinized real-world scenarios. First up, what happens when a contract costs way more than it makes? This is a massive application issue for practitioners dealing with shifting economic realities.
You sign a contract expecting a nice profit, but maybe supply chain costs explode or market prices tank. Suddenly, you're locked into unavoidable costs.
This is the exact definition of an onerous contract. It's a contract where the unavoidable costs of meeting the obligations exceed the economic benefits you expect to receive. If a contract becomes onerous, then the present obligation must be recognized as a provision. You measure it at the least net cost of exiting the contract, meaning the lower of the cost to fulfill it, or any penalties from just walking away.
Then we have restructuring, and the standard is incredibly strict right here. You shall not just provision for future operating losses just because you think next year is going to be tough. To book a restructuring provision, it requires a planned and controlled program, a material change in the scope or manner of the business, and most importantly, it must have created a valid expectation in the affected parties. Bottom line, if you haven't announced the layoffs or the factory closure to the people involved, you definitely do not have a provision yet.
Finally, Section 6, Exceptions and Disclosures.
Let's talk about what has to be revealed to the users of the financial statements to give them full transparency. Practitioners must disclose the entire life cycle for each class of provision. You're basically pulling back the curtain on your estimates. You have to disclose the carrying amounts at the beginning and end, any additional provisions made, amounts used or incurred, unused amounts reversed, and any increase from the discounting passage of time. It holds management fully accountable for their past estimates.
But beware the scope carve-outs. Everything we've discussed applies, except when you are applying IFRS 3 for business combinations. This is a really critical interaction where IFRS 3 supersedes the normal IAS 37 rules. If you're an acquirer, you must recognize a contingent liability even if an outflow is not probable, as long as its fair value can be measured reliably. It's a fascinating override that ensures buyers fully account for the risks they're purchasing.
As you apply IAS 37 to strictly navigate this funnel of certainty, I want you to consider this question. If accounting is the language of business, how much of your balance sheet is speaking in absolute certainties and how much is just highly regulated estimating? Behind those provision lines are probabilities, expected values, and heavy management judgments. Think about what these estimates truly reveal about the future risks your entity faces the next time you're weighing a 50% probability. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.